So we're trapped in a paradigm of treating the thing after it has been seen, and that is not transformation, but we call it transformation. It's not. That is late intervention. That's not transformation. So what we've been doing and labeling and calling transformation, it is not. It is late intervention. And late intervention can look extraordinarily sophisticated. And that is what makes it dangerous. Last week, the lives I did and the collapse broadcast I did, 3 key things hit a nerve based on the feedback I've had. The thought is not the origin. Your nervous system is not the origin. And this one created a lot of dialogue. The phrase everything is energy is not enough if no one can classify what has actually taken authority. That was a shocker for a lot of people. It was like a whoa. But they are not 3 separate arguments. They're not a mindset argument, which is the thought, or the nervous system argument, or an energy argument. They were 3 exposures of the same structural error. The market, self-development, self-help, even New Age spirituality, all those change paradigms, they keep assigning authorship to the first thing that it can see. That is what I call the false cause problem. The whole focus is on the false cause. The thought appears, so the thought is treated as the cause. Change your thoughts, change your beliefs, change your mindset. Reframe. Shift the neurons and all that. Or the body reacts. So the nervous system is treated now as cause. The emotion rises. So the emotion is treated as the cause. Or the behavior repeats. You know, that same old behavior that you swear on all things you will never do again. It repeats. And that is treated as cause. One of my favorite topics, pressure arrives. So pressure is treated as cause. We have pressure so misaligned, so maligned. It is not what we think it is. It is not what we have been told it is. It is not what we have been conditioned and programmed to respond to. It's not that. But it's treated as cause, and it is not. Because fundamentally, here's the thing. Visibility is not authorship. The first visible evidence of a pattern is not the thing generating the pattern. This is the key point that I want to carry through for today's live session. This is the rupture I want to collapse here today. First visibility is not origin, and yet absolutely everything is built around that. And once you see that, a lot of what is being sold as transformation begins to lose authority. Not because it never helps. That's not the problem, okay? The problem is that it helps, so I said last week, it helps enough to stay in charge. It can soften the thought, treating the thing as the origin. It can soften the thought. It can calm the body in the moment. It can explain the emotion. It can give language to the behavior, very elaborate language to the behavior, very insightful language to the behavior. It can reduce the intensity of the pressure in the moment too, but it still leaves the false cause in authority. And this is where the model begins to fracture. So in this live, it's not about whether thoughts matter, or whether the nervous system matters, or whether energy, emotion, story, body, pressure, behavior matter. They all matter. They all matter, of course. But the question is, and this is what I always bring it back to, because this is the only point that matters, is the question is whether they are origin. Because if the work begins after something has already taken authority, the work is already late. The false cause problem is not that the visible thing is imaginary. No, it's not. It is real. It's very real. That thought is very real. That emotion is very real. And that's why we trust it. That's why people trust it. The distortion enters when the visible thing is given a position it has not earned. This is the key point here. So a thought appears. And then the person is sent into the thought work. An emotion rises. And you are sent into emotional processing. The nervous system responds, reacts, is triggered. And you're sent into regulation. You start regulating. Pressure arrives, and it's inevitable. Pressure will always arrive at any time, at any moment, on any day. And you're told to reduce the pressure, and strategies around reducing pressure. Effort appears, and you're told to build more discipline, more consistency, more capacity, more trust, more alignment, more trust in divine timing is a classic one. But none of that proves origin. It only proves where the pattern became visible enough to be named. And that's why it has so much control, so much hold. That is the trap. Because once the visible thing is treated as source, the work moves to the wrong location. Look there, look there, look there. Don't look there. Look there, focus here. It's not useless. It's just the wrong location. A state can be very real. A state can be very real, but still be late. A body response can be intense and still not be the generator. A behavior can be obvious and still not be where the pattern began. So if the root had already taken authority before the thought appeared, before the body reacted, before the story formed, before the behavior repeated, then the visible thing is one thing and one thing only. It is the evidence. It is not authorship. Description is not the beginning. Visibility is not the beginning. Language is not the beginning. The first thing that can be named may already be after the fact. It's already done, already happened. The question is not if the thought was real. It was real. It's not whether the nervous system state is real. It was real. Or the pressure. It's real. Of course it's real. What we need to look at, what we are wise to focus on, is why was it given authorship? And this is the whole point. Visibility is not authorship. This is why we keep looping. This is why we go round and round. This is why, like, well, that didn't work. Maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. So we spend our life managing life, bracing for life, preparing for life. That's what essentially has happened. That is what this whole market has done, is created a whole dynamic where we live permanently in a cycle preparing for life, not experiencing life, not fully living life. The first thing you can name may be actually the last thing in the chain. The thought may be the announcement, not the cause. The nervous system may be showing response, not generating the root. The behavior may explain the pattern without having authored it. And that is the part that the market keeps missing. And I have spent decades now researching, observing, experiencing, and witnessing this. Once something becomes visible, people start treating it as if it has authority. They listen to it, they manage it, they build practices around it, they build identities around it, and they call it their pattern, their wound, their trauma response, their block, their fear, their capacity, their edge, whatever it is. And that is the moment the visible thing gets crowned with the ultimate authority. Evidence is being treated as source. The visible pattern is being treated as the generating layer. And once that happens, the work becomes obedient to the wrong authority. So no, the first thing you feel is not automatically truth. The first thing you think is not automatically truth. The first thing your body does is not automatically source. The first explanation that arrives is not automatically where the pattern began, because visibility is not authorship. First visibility is not origin. And when that distinction is missed, people do not simply work late, they build entire lives around working late. And what does that do? What is the cost of that? When false cause keeps authority, you become an expert at working at the wrong layer. This is why insight gets better, awareness gets better, explanation gets better, description keeps on getting better and better and better and more articulate and more sophisticated. And become better and better and better at regulating what appeared, reframing, processing, spiritualizing, explaining, managing, leading to a life of management. And then they repeat and repeat and repeat. The repetition is not asking for a better explanation. The repetition is evidence that the generating layer has not been reached, because when you reach the generating layer, clear that. There's no repeat. And this is where people lose years and decades. because they kept doing the work that began after the thing had already moved. And this is the most expensive kind of work, not the work that does nothing, the work that helps just enough to keep the false cause in authority. It reduces the intensity, it gives a better language, it makes the loop feel more intelligent and also more responsible, or maybe even more mature. But the same output returns under consequence. So the money gets close, the decision has to be made, the offer has to be named and presented, the relationship asks for presence, the body is required to move, and the same authority takes over again. That is not depth, and that is certainly not freedom. In my model of the world, that is refinement inside the same location. Maintenance with a better language. And yeah, absolutely, maintenance can look very impressive. It can sound extraordinarily intelligent, and it can actually feel and look very embodied and very spiritual. It can actually look trauma-informed and disciplined. But if the same root still takes authority when consequence arrives, the work has not reached the generating layer. It has only become more fluent at describing what appeared. And this is why the last 2 lives have exploded. Literally. Because the market has already done this with thought. Now it is doing the same thing with the nervous system. It must end. The last 2 lives had to come together because the era did not end when the market moved from thought to nervous system language. It just changed location. What's the next location? How many decades was the emphasis on mindset, mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions, intentions? How many? And now all the emphasis has shifted and pivoted, to use a popular word, has pivoted to nervous system. Then what? It has just changed location. Mindset made the thought lead, nervous system work made the state lead, the body lead, but neither proves origin. One says change the thought, the other says regulate the response. They both can have value, but they're not origin. A better thought does not prove the root has changed. A calmer body does not prove the root has changed. And I put it to you right now, this is a very important conversation, because right now, the nervous system language has become almost untouchable. People are being taught to treat the body's response as the source. But the body may be reporting what has already taken authority. The contraction is the report. The freeze is the report, is the evidence. The fog is the report or the evidence. But the report is not origin. The evidence is not origin. And if the report is mistaken for origin, regulation becomes the new management system. More embodied than mindset, more believable than mindset, more intelligent sounding than mindset, but still late. And relief is not correction. A better language for the response is not the same as correct location. If the same root still takes authority when consequence arrives, the work has not reached the origin. It has moved from the mind to the body and it's called that earlier. But earlier is not the same as deeper, and deeper is not the same as origin. The same thing happens with pressure. Pressure looks immediate, It feels like the thing to solve. And this is so important. An actual fact, part of a much bigger conversation because of how distorted the construct of pressure has become. So you feel pressure before posting something, or before naming your offer if you're an entrepreneur, before sending a message, before making a decision, before being seen, before allowing the money to get close. That's a big one. And because pressure feels so real, it gets trusted. And that is the mistake. We start managing the pressure. And the pressure then starts behaving like instruction. Push back, delay, prepare more, regulate first, get clearer, get more clarity. Wait until the pressure settles. Wait until the body's ready. And then you think that you're being wise. But often you're obeying the pressure as if it's truth, because pressure may not be origin. There are times when pressure is origin, of course, and that is when you are driving down the road and you're driving down the road, you're driving through the green light, and somebody jumps a red light out in front of you. There is pressure in that moment, and that is appropriate, but that's point in time. But most often, it's not that. Most often, pressure is not origin. Pressure may feel, or pressure may be what signal feels like after it has already been misread. So the pressure is what it feels like after the signal has been misread. How we have interpreted the signal. Because once signal is misread or distorted or routed through interference, the body moves as if that distortion is true. And that is where effort appears. That is where urgency starts appearing. That's where the body starts to live in a permanent state of brace. That's where the compulsion to overwork, over-deliver, over-promise, over-please, over-control, and avoidance appears. Reactive responses, reactive behavior starts happening. And because the pressure feels real, the behavior feels necessary. Because the pressure feels like it's real, it's true. The behavior, the response, the reaction feels absolutely necessary, understandably. But it is not origin. That's how the false cause stays in charge. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily even look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like pushing harder, or it looks like waiting or preparing. Sometimes it looks like needing to regulate before the move can be made, needing to change state. But what if pressure is already late? What if pressure is not telling you what to do? What if pressure is showing you what has already been obeyed before you had a language for it? And now pressure is not being treated as truth, it's being treated as output. So instead of trying to figure out how do I get rid of pressure, or how do I build more capacity for pressure, or to manage this pressure, or manage the behavior that pressure creates, what we should be focusing on is what has the system already obeyed before this became visible. And this is where signal comes in. And I want to be very precise about that word signal, because signal is already being turned into another vague phrase. People are using it like focus or attention or intuition or noise reduction. That is not what I mean when I refer to signal. Someone can be very focused and still be moving from distortion. You can be calm and still obeying the wrong thing. You can have the right words, the right plan, the right intention, and still be rooted from the wrong place, from a distorted place. So when I say signal, I'm not talking about what you're paying attention to. I'm talking about what the system is actually obeying. That's the difference. Once first visibility is no longer treated as origin, that question starts to change. It's not what am I thinking? It's not what is the nervous system doing? It's not what emotion is present or what story is running. Or how do I get rid of pressure? They all begin with what has already appeared. They may describe the pattern, but they do not locate what took authority. By the time the thought is there, something has already moved, right? By the time the body has reacted, something has already been obeyed. By the time the story is available, meaning has already been organized. What has the system already obeyed before this became visible? And this is not a mindset or regulation question, and it's not another emotional processing question. It is a location question. And once location changes, the work cannot stay where it was. It is impossible. Because now we're not improving the thing that appeared, we're locating what had authority before the report, before the evidence existed. Earlier is not a concept here. It is the location of the work. I do not start by asking the thought to explain itself. The thought may already be the report, the evidence. I do not start by regulating the state as if the state is source. The state may already be showing what has been obeyed. I do not start by interpreting the story as if the story has authorship. And this is important because this is rampant. The story may be the mind trying to organize meaning around a root that has already taken authority. I have witnesses, I have lived this. When I saw this in my own experiences as a teenager living in the most obscenely oppressive, abusive environment, everything changed. The room stayed the same, but interpretation shifted. And that changed the trajectory of my entire life, where the story never defined me, never had authority. And through the codex system, I read the root generating the output before it becomes visible. Codex names and classifies the architecture of that root. Signal routing is the mechanism. And the work clears interference at the generating layer. And that is where I keep my focus, because the output, the consequence, the behavior is tracked through consequence, not through how impressive the language is, not through how much insight someone has, not through how calm they feel in the moment, not through testimony, through consequence. What moved, what changed, what repeated, what stopped, what reorganized. Because at the end of the day, clear the distortion at origin, reality reorganizes on its own. And that is what I'm interested in. What is shifting? What is changing? What is reorganizing? Not that one feels more inspired or more whole or more calm in the moment. Life has to change, so you're no longer living a life bracing and managing life, but rather allowing your system to experience life at full. If the output does not change under consequence, then we are not looking at structural freedom. Freedom does not come with more awareness or more insight, more understanding. Freedom comes when reality reorganizes and you live life and you fully experience life without constant management. If the output does not change under consequence, then we are not looking at structural freedom, and that is what I'm interested in. Structural freedom, because if it's not happening, you're looking at management, and management can become very sophisticated. And this is why the old paradigm cannot simply be improved, because it begins too late. So we are living inside an after visibility paradigm. An entire industry has been built around what appears after something has already taken authority. It sees thought and builds builds thought work. It sees emotion and builds emotional processing. It sees nervous system respond and builds regulation. It sees behavior and builds behavior change. My favorite, it sees energy and builds frequency language. It sees a story and builds a narrative identity. And yeah, all of it looks responsible, it looks intelligent, it looks sophisticated sometimes, because something has appeared, something can be named, something can be tracked, something can be worked on. But the visible thing is not always the generating layer. The old paradigm is not wrong in that it sees nothing. It does. It sees a lot. It sees all the evidence. It sees all the report, all the data, as I call it in my research. But seeing what appeared is not the same as reading what produced it. And this is the category break. This is what I bring and the Codex system brings. If the work starts with what appeared, even the most sophisticated model is still late. Because more awareness does not correct it, more regulation, more explanation, more spiritual language, none of that corrects it. Self-awareness, insight will fail when it gives authority to the wrong cause. And that's the part that people don't want to look at. Because the issue is not the language, the issue is the location. You see this everywhere. Once the location is clear, someone feels pressure before posting publicly, or the market calls it fear of visibility. So they regulate the nervous system, reframe the thought, look for the wound, push through with effort, and then post. And then the same contraction returns the next time the visibility is required. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't shift anything long-term or sustainably or anything. Because visibility was not the origin, or the fear of visibility was not the origin. The pressure around the visibility was not the origin. The nervous system reaction to the visibility was not the origin. They were evidence that something had already taken authority before the post ever became the issue. And the same with certain behaviors, so many behaviors, like, for example, procrastination. Someone says, I keep procrastinating, and immediately the market gives it a name. It's avoidance, it's freeze, it's perfectionism, it's fear of success, fear of failure, it's lack of discipline, it's a capacity issue. But procrastination may be the visible output of a route that has already decided movement was not clean. Think about it. So the market labels procrastination as something to be done, something to be fixed, something to be overcome. But it may be the visible output of a route that has already decided the movement is not clean. By the time you are not moving, the authority has already been selected. So correcting the behavior can make you look more functional for a while. It does not solve the root. It does not prove the root is clean. The same with money. Someone says, money makes me contract, or I have money blocks. The market calls it money blocks. Crazy concept. But money may only be where the false cause becomes visible. The contraction may not be about money at all. It may be evidence that authority has already moved before the money arrives. And this is especially important with focus and execution, because people assume that if someone is executing, that move must be clean. And that's not the case. Someone can be highly focused and still be distorted. You can be producing, posting, leading, selling, building, performing, and still be rooted through pressure, proof, control, threat, compensation. Execution is not proof of clean signal. It may only prove the root has enough force to move. And that is why output alone is not enough. The world measures output. I read authority. What is being obeyed underneath the output? That is the question, because the visible pattern is not always the generating layer. And until that is addressed, the cost is extraordinarily, and it is more than what is obvious. Because it's more than, the cost is way more than just now living a life, because you can be executing in all the ways, but you're execute when it's misrouted, when the routing is distorted, you'll be executing in many different ways, and it will be distortion, and even executing efficiently, but you're still living a life of management, bracing, effort, not experiencing life, not allowing life. And the cost of that on the body is unbelievable. It robs of vitality and enters the program of decaying. So this is the shift. Stop treating the first visible thing as the source. The thought, the emotion, the nervous system response, the body response, the behavior, the story, the pressure, they all may matter. But if they are downstream, they cannot be given authority. Late work, no matter how sophisticated, is late work. Psychology describes behavior after it appears. Self-development interprets the pattern after it appears. The nervous system work manages the response after it appears. Energy language names the state after it appears. I read the root before behavior appears. Through the codex system, I read what has taken authority before output becomes visible. Codex names and classifies the architecture of that root. And as I said, signal routing is the mechanism, and the work clears interference at the generating layer. And this is where output behavior is tracked through consequence, not through how clear it sounds, not through how calm it feels, not through how much language someone has around the pattern, through what actually changes, what stops repeating, what moves cleanly, what no longer needs management. What would life be like when you no longer needed managing life? When you no longer braced for life? First, visibility is not origin. Visibility is not authorship. The visible thing may be real, it may be intense and accurate, it may be the first thing you can name, but it cannot be given origin authority if it is downstream. That is the false cause problem. So when I work with someone, I'm not looking for another explanation of the pattern. I am reading what had authority before the visible thing appeared, before the contraction, before the shutdown, before the fear, before the delay, before the behavior, before you even had a language for it. And that is what I read in the structural review. The structural review is not a discovery call, it's not a conversation about the pattern. It is where I read the generating root behind what keeps repeating and identify the correct next access route. And that's what happens through the structural review. So I invite you to go to the structural review page, listen to the video, and complete the questionnaire if you are done with managing life. And let's read what is rooting. Thought is not origin. Nervous system is not origin. Visibility of the thing is not origin. My question is, what had authority before any of them appeared? If you were done with mindset work, with regulation work, with emotional processing, or building an encyclopedia of better language around the pattern, and the same output, the same behavior, the same consequences still returns over and over and over, then apply for a structural review, and I'll put the link in the comments. And until next time, watch what comes up. And don't take first visibility as origin.